This is episode 45 of Spot On Insurance, your licensing and regulatory compliance guide. Welcome back to part 2 of budgeting for basic licensing and compliance. My guest today is Joyce King, Quality Assurance Administrator for Insurance Licensing Services of America, ILSA. She has over 10 years experience in insurance licensing and regulatory compliance. She provides education and consulting to ILSA's clients across the United States in matters ranging from licensing and affiliation to filing and reporting in the surplus lines industry. Last week in episode 44, we explored what to look for when expanding licensing to state outside your domicile, some traps to look out for, and how these might impact your budget. We also looked at what to do when you are no longer doing business in a state, how to surrender your multi-state licenses gracefully. Now, today, we'll look at registered agent services and further explore how to wind down licenses from every state department of insurance where you're doing business. We will also spend some time visiting other issues that can impact your licensing and compliance budget, including the exit of your designated producer and how to cover yourself. Finally, we get to the bread and butter and answer some questions like, what are some of the costs associated with multi-state licensing and what resources are available to help me budget? Let's get right to it, Joyce. First of all, welcome back to Spot On.
Thank you, Ted. I appreciate you having me back.
Can you take a few minutes and educate our listeners about the role of registered agents in the insurance industry?
Yes, registered agents are, for anybody that doesn't know, the Secretary of State, once you register with them, they require someone or a company to receive mail and service of process on your behalf from their state. So if you are in Nebraska, if you're registered in Nebraska, but you're physically located in Arizona, you need to have someone in the state of Nebraska to receive your mail or receive your service of process. So a lot of people just, reach out to registered agent companies, and there are plenty of them out there, to handle that for them. It's a great idea to make sure you're using the same registered agent across all states so that you can get a consolidated bill. And if you're using them throughout many states, you can probably get a discounted rate from them as well. There are very few exceptions to this, Ted. New York, you don't have to get an outside registered agent. The New York Department of State will serve as your registered agent free. Connecticut, I believe, is the same way. And then in Oklahoma Secretary of State will serve as your registered agent, but there is a fee associated, and it's $60. And I don't believe that's optional. I believe you have to use Oklahoma Secretary of State. Ted, a lot of the registered agent services out there are competitive with each other. So, if you have to reach out to more than one and just find out what kind of deal you can get from them. But again, you want to try to get one registered agent service to represent you in all the states that you're registered in so that you can get some sort of discounted or consolidated rate.
Oh, okay. Now, if I plan to no longer do business in a state, do I have to consider the same thing we were talking about earlier?
Yes.
How do I withdraw my business? What do I have to do?
Right. So that's something that, say you've sold your book of business and you're getting ready to retire, and there's no need for that agency to continue on or carry on for whatever reason. So we call that a wind down. Mm-hmm. And in winding down, that's the process of you're removing yourself from every state department of insurance where you're licensed. That's the surrenders I talked about earlier. And right. Then you are also withdrawing your registrations from each Secretary of State where you're already registered. You are doing your final returns to the Departments of Revenue. You're marking everything final so that there's no mistake. You're getting out of business or, removing yourself from doing business in that particular state. So it is a process. It's another one of those processes that I talk about that are consecutive. You don't want to surrender your resident state until last. You don't want to withdraw your domicile registration until last. Make sure everything else is appropriately withdrawn before you surrender, cancel, withdraw from your domicile and resident states. If you do those prematurely, the other states could forfeit or revoke just by default. So you want to save that to last.
So what are my liabilities in this point?
So Ted, for the client out there that says, I think I'm going to retire and I'm just going to walk away from insurance and never do a thing again, not surrender those licenses, not withdraw those registrations. Just keep in mind, I talked about this very thoroughly earlier. The departments of insurance don't know you're gone. The Secretary of State doesn't know you're gone. The Surplus Line Association doesn't know you've left. And in some cases, I mean, you can write them a letter that says I'm no longer doing business. But if you're not filling out the appropriate forms and doing final returns and final reports and paying final fees, then you are not appropriately withdrawing or surrendering or getting yourself out of those states.
Joyce, what other things can impact my licensing and compliance budget that I'm planning for this upcoming year?
Moving, your agency moving. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. Name changes, whether corporate or individual. DP, designated producer changes of any kind, director and officer changes of any kind. Let me just kind of take those one by one for you real quick.
Sure.
If you are moving your agency, besides the obvious expense of moving your agency, how that's going to affect your licensing and compliance budget is that those kind of changes need to be reported to every department of insurance where your agency and or your producers are licensed. And guess what? You only have 30 days to do it from the date of your move. Okay. On the annual return side of things with your Secretary of State registrations, if your annual return is coming up pretty soon, you can make that change on that next upcoming annual return. And I'm saying within the next few months, it's okay to just make that update with the Secretary of State. That's really what those annual returns are for. If you just did an annual return and it's not due for 2 years, and then right behind that you move, it's really a good idea to go ahead and notify the state of that move. You definitely want to notify your registered agent of that move. That is also very important, so that, like I said, they're out there receiving mail and service of process on your behalf. If you don't tell them that you've moved, they're going to send your mail and your service of process to your old address. But, as far as time and money and extra compliance requirements, you need to report any of those address changes to any of those regulatory authorities. Name changes. Two different kind of name changes that I'm talking about. Individuals, obviously, ladies getting married, divorced. If, for any reason that you're changing your name, that's another thing that for the most part you can, they're not as, I guess the states aren't as stringent on the name changes they are on the address change. Some are, some aren't. But I would say, just as a rule of thumb, get the name reported or changed at the state within about 30 days. And that's for individual licenses. For a lady either getting married or divorced, she's probably going to have to submit a copy of her new driver's license with her new name on it, a copy of the marriage certificate, or a copy of the divorce decree in most cases.
What about changing the name of my business? How does that fit into the picture?
If you are changing an agency name from Inc. to LLC, that is absolutely not a name change. That is a corporate structure change. And you cannot imagine how many times I've had to talk to clients about that, and they're like, I don't understand why this is so difficult. I'm just changing my name. No, you're not. You are changing from an Inc. to an LLC, and that's not even close to a name change. That is a full-on corporate structure change. At the departments of insurance, it can be handled as a name change, and for the most part, they're going to just go ahead and make that change for you. At the Secretary of State, it's a whole different ball game. You are going to have to either convert your entity from an Inc. to an LLC, or you're going to have to withdraw your Inc. and then requalify as an LLC. Lots and lots of reports and state fees and time and effort goes into that. So that is highly impactful to your budget.
What happens if I have a designated producer retiring or resigning?
Okay.
How do I handle that?
All right. That is another I will say time sensitive and can get very costly kind of change. So when I talk to clients, I always try to just, give them a little bit of free advice. You want your designated producer to be, number one, they should be an officer of the company, because if you're going national, there's about 12 states that just require that off the bat. Do they have to have ownership in the company? No. They can, for the most part, just have an officer title, but you want to make sure that it's somebody that is highly vested in that company. They're not a fly-by-night. It's not just an agent you want to use right now to get things up and running. It needs to be somebody that's got some kind of investment, because the last thing you want is to, get all your agency licensing tied to this designated producer, and then they fly the coop.
So do you see a lot of that?
Well, I've seen my share of it, and I tell you one thing. In fact, we have one client. They have gone through no less than 3 designated producers in the last, I'm going to say 14, 15 months, and it is devastating. It has already wreaked havoc with some of their licenses. At some point in time, we can do what we can do and get some things changed over in 30 days, because that's another requirement. You've got 30 days to name your new designated producer from the time that one leaves you. So just back to this particular client. Several months ago, they called me and said, hey, our designated producer left, but we've got another one ready to replace them. And I said, okay, is it an officer? Yes, it's an officer. Okay, good deal. So we termed the one designated producer and then reaffiliated the new designated producer. And like I said, it was costly and it was time consuming, but it was done. Not 6 months later, the second guy, he's the one that called, not the agency. They didn't call and forewarn us about this. The individual did. And he said, I just want you to know I'm gone. I left. I am not their designated producer. Do not put my name on anything. Make sure I'm coming off of everything. And by the way, I've told the states myself. I went ahead and sent notifications to the states. So I don't know if he sent out a flash email or if he sent them all a letterhead, but sure enough, shortly after he told us this, we called the agency and had a chat with them, and yes, they confirmed he's no longer there. And we checked with the states, and sure enough, the licenses they're starting to fall away. Because if there's no designated producer, then there's nobody there to be responsible for the agency license. So like
How
I said,
do I get ahead of all this? I mean, let's say I own an agency and I've got one designated producer. The minute that I get an inkling that this individual might be leaving, if they're retiring, I can see it's simple because you have a longer term. But what's the process? What do I do to prepare for this?
What I always suggest is just have that backup. In the states that allow you to have more than one designated producer, just go ahead, bite the bullet, and list 2 people. If one flies on you and they're gone the next day, at least you've got a backup. Now, the only states where you will be scrambling to make that replacement are those few states that only allow one designated producer. And in those states that only allow one designated producer, if you are dealing in property and casualty products and life accident and health products, that one person has to have both lines of authority for the agency to be compliant for you to sell both things. So, like I said, just in the few states that only allow one designated producer, and I'm totally spitballing here, but I'm going to say there's 10. Those are the states where you would just have to scramble and get your second person affiliated as the designated producer as soon as you can. But in all the other states, if it is at all possible, go ahead and get 2 people lined out for that position. It's a good idea to make sure they both have some kind of officer title, and then hopefully they're not somebody that's going to be here today and gone tomorrow. But yeah, the redundancy is always what I suggest.
Okay.
Ted, beyond any changes with your designated producer, I said that person needs to be an officer or should be an officer. Another thing that has to be reported to the departments of insurance are changes to your directors and officers. And that is typically a separate process than just reaffiliating a new designated producer. And in addition to making any changes to the designated producer, like I said, that designated producer should be an officer. If one has left and another one is coming in as your DP and they were both officers, that's going to prompt another change. And that's the director and officer updates to the departments of insurance. Again, something that typically, needs to be done within about 30 days. That's pretty much kind of the expectation across the board. And now, not all of your directors and officers are license holders. So You could be updating directors and officers, that are on the board, maybe from a parent company or what have you. And again, like I said, they don't necessarily hold a license, but they need to be updated, whether their percentage of ownership maybe has changed for those that have ownership. For any, like I said, if somebody's leaving and another person's coming in, then we're going to have some title changeovers or what have you. But that's a separate process from the designated producer changes, but equally as important. They both need to be reported in about 30 days of the change.
These seem to be small, nagging complexities that are just a pain to deal with.
They are, and it's widely these smaller compliance pieces that are required that a lot of the folks out there that are doing the licensing for their agency, they don't know about these things. A lot of folks think it's just easy to go into to a portal and submit a license application and pay the fee. But they don't know once the license is issued that you have to, affiliate your producers to this agency license, or that you need to, update your directors and officers if there's a change next month, or that, let's just say in the state of Virginia, you go out and you get the agency a license with the Department of Insurance. And I've seen this happen so many times. But they didn't realize or didn't know that within 90 days, they were supposed to have went to the State Corporation Commission and gotten the business registration, the certificate of authority. So if they didn't go do that within 90 days, guess what? They lost their agency license. Like I said, I can't tell you how many times clients have come to us and said, I can't understand why I just lost this license. What did I do wrong?
Well, that's a lot of things to keep up with and then go out there and market your product.
Absolutely.
I can see where it's headaches.
Definitely. Good headaches for me. I enjoy it. Putting a puzzle together.
Spot On is sponsored by Insurance Licensing Services of America. Need help with corporate name changes, annual returns, or surplus lines tax filings? Feeling overwhelmed? Well, if you are looking for experts in regulatory compliance, you've come to the right place. ILSA provides the industry with over 50 services. To learn more about the company and how they can help, visit ilsainc.com.
Joyce, I believe that you have some figures to share with us to help us wrap up day 2.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Ted. I want our listeners to be able to walk away with some actual estimated numbers in mind. Recently, we prepared a quote for a prospective client who came in, and they were interested in licensing in all 50 states plus DC, business registrations with every Secretary of State, surplus lines licensing, surplus lines membership registration, the bonds, everything that goes with all of the licensing and compliance for this. Basically, the estimate of state fees came out just a little bit north of $50,000. So I want to give kind of a breakdown and give the average estimated costs per each item, individual licensing or corporate licensing. So starting out, and I'm just talking about P&C licensing or life and health licensing. If you're looking at combining P&C and life and health all together in one application, the state fees overall can be a little bit higher. For the most part, many states will let you have P&C and life and health for the same fee. So if you do anticipate getting both license types, go in on one application and try to get both license types at the same time. That'll save you time, processing fees, and additional state fees at a later time. But anyways, property and casualty licensing, the average estimate state fee for P&C licensing is about $125. Some states there is actually no fee, maybe just a fingerprinting fee or a $15 fee, and then some states are up into $325, $350 per state. So it really depends. If you're not wanting to go national and you're just wanting to pick and choose a few states, that could be a little higher or a little lower than the average I'm giving you. But basically about $125 per state if you're looking at going national, all 50 plus DC. Same thing for the corporate licenses, right around 125 to 135 is the estimate, the average estimate for all 50 plus DC. In this example, like I said, we also quoted surplus lines. So for anyone that might be interested in surplus lines licensing, you're looking at an estimated average state fee of about $260 if you're looking at all 50. That's going to be for all of the individual licenses plus those states that issue the agency the surplus lines licenses. I believe there's about 17 states that don't issue surplus lines as a separate line of authority. So basically you're looking at maybe getting 84, 87, somewhere in there, licenses total between your individual designated producer and your agency. So keep in mind about 260 is the average there. Some are, again, lows can be $30. I've seen the highs north of 1,000, about 1,100 in a couple of states for surplus lines licenses.
Okay.
All right. Business registrations with the Secretary of State. If you are looking at all 50 states, you probably already got your domicile filed. So I would say the average for 50 states is about $245.
Got it.
Okay. Don't forget, when you are completing your business registrations and or some of your licensing, you need to go and order, say, certified copies of your articles or certified good standing letter from the Secretary of State. So factor in a little bit of extra state fees for that. Some states will require bonds. For instance, California requires a bond for surplus lines. Some states require a bond if you're from a certain other state. So there's reciprocity issues there. So you need to factor in reaching out and getting your bonds in place for surplus lines licensing. Very, very little on the property and casualty side. Affiliations, and I do mean additional affiliations. Obviously, when you are filling out your agency applications and naming your designated producer, that is an automatic affiliation. You have just affiliated your designated producer to your entity. Beyond calling that person the designated producer, there are some states that require what we call an additional affiliation. So if you're looking at licensing nationally, you can factor in probably anywhere between 13 and 15 additional affiliations. The average cost, I would say, is $35 per state. Some are zero, some are higher. So you're looking at about $455 or so for the affiliation cost. Surplus lines membership registrations, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, if you're interested in getting surplus lines licenses, there are some states that require you to register with that surplus line association and get the membership registration. A couple of those states have state fees for that as well. So you're looking at about 7 individual kind of registrations, whether it be for the agency or the individual, and an average of 20 per state. Most are zero, but you could be looking at about $140, $150 for your membership registrations.
Okay, these are a lot of numbers. So tell me something. Does your company have an easy way for me to get all of this calculated?
Yes, we, as I mentioned at the very beginning of just this segment, we send out quotes. We call those project cost analyses. So it's all completely itemized, top to bottom, just exactly some of the stuff that I've mentioned here. It will itemize your cost for individual licensing, your cost for agency licensing, the cost for business registrations, Department of Revenue registrations, the membership registrations. It's all very itemized and very detailed on the quote.
So do you guys charge for this quote?
Not to submit a quote, no.
So I can, if I'm looking for this information, I simply can call you and you'll fill in the blanks for me, and then you'll give me a total.
That's right.
And it's
beyond just having a few basic questions.
And it's free.
That's what we do.
And it's free of charge.
It is free.
Okay, that's good. You guys make it easy.
Yeah, we try. A few other things that I will mention. Appointments. Don't forget appointment requests through your carrier. There's typically not a state fee for that. The carriers pay the fees in that instance, but I would just say, for instance, in surplus lines in Florida, there's something called an e-appoint fee, and that comes with a state fee of about $150. the business registrations that I've talked about a couple of times already. Once you have your registrations in place, there will be additional reporting requirements a little bit later on down the line. Like I said, a lot of them are going to require annual returns at some point in time, or annual corporate franchise tax returns. But more in the immediate future would be initial annual returns, initial newspaper publications, initial corporate and franchise tax returns. So you want to factor that in as well, depending on which states you're looking to get into. Some can be a little more costly than others. But of the states that require initial returns, you can go ahead and factor in a little bit about over $1,000 for your initial publications and returns.
Okay.
But that pretty much kind of summarizes it. I just wanted to be able to provide some numbers. If somebody wants to sit down and try to plot it out on paper and get a good idea. Something else I had mentioned earlier in this podcast was the whole timing of getting licenses rolled out. So if you're interested in rolling out a big national program, but timing is a factor and maybe money at the onset of the project, split it up. Pick your priority states, and I've named those already: California, Texas, Florida, Mass, New York. They're among the states that take the longest to get into them because of all the varying paperwork and requirements that you have to go through. And also, I'm not going to say they're the most costly, but go ahead and knock those out first and then move on into the other states that are easier to roll out.
Joyce, our creative team has put together a checklist for our listeners. To download it, surf your way over to spotoninsurance.com/marketing guide. This checklist, we hope, will help the business owner review his or her goals, develop strategies, and create a compliance budget. It briefly touches upon most, if not all, of the discussions we've been having in episode 44 and 45. And if everything you're listening to is worthy, go to iTunes and give Spot On Insurance a 5-star review. Joyce, what are the key takeaways?
Basically, especially for expansion, you really need to have a good sense of the things that, like I mentioned earlier, that are not obvious, besides just, going to the State Department of Insurance and seeing how much it costs to get this license for this line of authority in this state. You also do need to understand the outerlying requirements, the affiliations, any, like I said, publications if you're registering at the Secretary of State, where you absolutely have to register with the Secretary of State before you can get your agency license, et cetera, et cetera. So, in such a case like that, don't hesitate to reach out to, a licensing vendor and have them give you a quote. If you really want to know almost down to the penny what you are looking at to expand into new states, get somebody who knows every single thing that's going to be required and get them to give you that kind of information.
Thank you, Joyce. My guest today has been Joyce King, Quality Assurance Administrator for Insurance Licensing Services of America, ILSA. Joyce, let me put the spotlight on you a little bit. Tell me, how do people get in touch with you if they need help? After listening to this, I imagine that you might get a bunch of phone calls from people saying, I do not want to deal with these headaches. So how do they reach you?
Well, it happens all the time. That's what keeps me busy, Ted. My number, in fact, I'll give you my direct line right here to my desk. It's 254-729-6127. I am absolutely happy to answer any kind of questions regarding licensing, compliance, surplus lines, tax filings, anything I can help you with. And if I don't happen to know the answer right off the top of my head, I'll find it, or I will get someone here at ILSA that knows that. If you prefer email, my email address is j.king@ilsainc.com.
Joyce, it's been a pleasure. You've just been a wealth of information. Thank you so much for being part of Spot On Insurance.
Thank you so much, Ted, for inviting me today.